Bunny. Is that fine?
Okay.
Okay, we're going live now in 6 seconds. Om Bhurvubhasvaha Tatsavidurvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Yo Yuna Prachodaya. Om Bhurvubhasvaha Tatsavidurvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Yo Yuna Prachodaya. Om Bhurvubhasvaha Tatsavidurvarenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhiyo Yona Prachodaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Namaste, Vanakkam, Namaskaram, and welcome to another episode of Dharma Samvad. In today's program, we explore and celebrate the rich history of the indentured Indians who arrived in South Africa 160 years ago. Their journey through the Kala Pani or the dark was not always an easy one. It was a time filled with great challenge and difficulty. But in spite of that, the strength and the resilience of the indentured Indians came to the shores of a very foreign country, South Africa, endured for this amount of time. And today, in this program, we celebrate with different speakers from around the country who are part and parcel of the heritage committees that have been set up to look and examine the history of the indentured Indians. And for the very first time, to recreate their stories, to drive their stories in terms of education, and to ensure that these stories are shared with the next generation. So today in our lineup, in Dharma Samvad, as with every week, we have Pandit Kirit Bhattacharya ji, who is none other than the priest at the Marlborough or the Radhesham Mandir in Johannesburg. And he's been the instrument behind this channel in order to encourage various Hindus on different topics in the last few months. And as we know, last week we celebrated Deepavali, and Deepavali was a wonderful celebration of color and light in the country. However, in spite of that, there has been some challenge. And today, some of our guests are going to answer these questions around how we are living in this country, how we recognized for who we are as a community, what are the gaps that we need to bridge in order for our country and the rest of the world to recognize the contributions of our community. So, first up today, we have a Hindu Kar Sevak from Port Elizabeth, Ashwin Daya, apologies, who has been involved in the 1860 committee, also been involved at an ad hoc level in collating the stories of the community and where they have come from during the indenture and post-indenture country. Ashwin Bhai has also been involved in the Hindu community, involved in the work of satsang, education, and he's also been involved in preserving the rich legacy of our Hindu value system. Namaste, Ashwin Bhai, and welcome to the show today.
Namaste, Ashika Ben. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. So, we are here to celebrate and to acknowledge the rich history of the 1860 settlers who have come from India to South Africa. And we know that while they had come through these difficult challenges that they faced under the British rule, that in spite of that, they persevered and they were quite resilient in terms of the work ethic that they had to endure. But coming into South Africa, being part of the indentured system, which was slavery, it was nothing short of slavery. They were treated as numbers in a roster. How do you think that the Hindus and the Indians who had come here felt, looking for coming to Africa and trying to find their new fortune? How do you think they felt when they arrived in this country? To find a very, very foreign space.
Well, we all know that the Indians that left the shores of India came out to South Africa looking for better pastures and were falsely promised a better life in South Africa. And upon landing on our shores after a long, arduous journey across the seas, or the Kalapanis, as you've mentioned, were probably shocked to realize that their life became one of indenture. And as you correctly also alluded to, the fact that indenture was really nothing short of slavery. And it must have been an absolute shock for them to have realized how they were virtually hoodwinked into coming to this country. But that nevertheless makes our story in this country where we are today all the more amazing to think of the sacrifices that our forebears encountered and overcame over the years.
Absolutely. And I think, that the generations that came after them proved to be strong because of a value system. And the value system comes from our rich traditions in whatever religion that we follow at the time. And for the Hindu, they followed the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita, two important scriptures that gave them hope and courage in a very, very foreign space. Would you say that the values of the Ramayana and the Bhagavad Gita play an important role in the life of the Hindus and played an important role then and still continue to play an important role now?
Absolutely. I think during the days of indenture, while they toiled in the fields, one can but only imagine when they retreated to their homes at night that they certainly found solace in our great teachings. And certainly that played a major role in our forebears surviving. I mean, we do know many of them also couldn't withstand some of the treatments they endured. And we know that there were some really tragic developments that took place as well during that period. But clearly, I think ultimately going back to spirit and to the source must have indeed been a great source of comfort for them.
Absolutely. One of the things that we've seen, that the ships, when they came to KwaZulu Natal, or it was known as Port Natalia at that time, there were also there were indentured Indians that arrived in the Cape, and there were some interesting stories that occurred, with them arriving in the Eastern Cape. Can you share a little bit about that experience?
Okay, so it's an interesting story because as far as the Eastern Cape goes, essentially they were not indentured laborers who ended up here, but instead they were passenger Indians. And as such, there's no real record of when first settlement took place, but it's estimated to have been in the early 1880s. And I think subsequent records are around 1882 were of passengers that disembarked from India or from Mauritius. So essentially, these were people who then came out to the shores of this land looking for better opportunities, but they came as passenger Indians. And it must also be remembered that the Eastern Cape economy at the time was driven by the discovery of diamonds in Kimberley. So many of them also ended up coming from Natal or Transvaal. Some of them, I think, walking down to Kimberley, walking down to Daar. And then those who disembarked in Port Elizabeth settled in Port Elizabeth. They settled in the Utenek area. Then they went up to Grahamstown. Others ended up in East London. And that was essentially how the legacy started in the Eastern Cape. And it's also very interesting to see how it's developed since. And keeping in mind that, relatively speaking, to the Natal and Transvaal at the time population groups, ours is a very small number in comparison.
Absolutely. And you have a wonderful, interesting story to tell in terms of your grandfather, or your father rather, who was declared the oldest volunteer for the FIFA World Cup. And he has been involved with many of the institutions in the Eastern Cape. Can you share some of those lovely anecdotes of your dad and how he actually became a volunteer during that time?
Yes, certainly. My dad, Amrit Bhai Daya, was appointed during the 2010 World Cup tournament, FIFA World Cup tournament that took place in South Africa, and ended up being appointed as a volunteer. And out of, I think, around 65,000 applications, ended up being the oldest volunteer. Of the 65,000, obviously it was a selected number were chosen. And that started an amazing journey in his life at the age of 80, where he encountered the most interesting experience in his life, being exposed to a totally new dimension and serving his country in the process. And during the course of this year, during the 10-year anniversary celebrations, FIFA officially recognized him as being the oldest volunteer in 2010. Sadly, Dad passed away 2 months ago, but he left behind a great legacy of seva and just generally of giving and compassion. And in fact, one of his great passions was the preservation of this legacy of Indian settlement, particularly in the Eastern Cape. And so 10 years ago, he actually started researching and collating information on Eastern Cape Indian settlement. And one of his great dreams was to write his memoirs intertwined with the history. And that project commenced, but unfortunately did not reach fruition.
Oh, but I'm sure he's given you the baton to take on and also hand it over to the next generation. I think that's absolutely amazing. And that's one of the key themes that I'd like to explore in today's program is how today can we actually create our histories and our stories. Because every time it's the 16th of November, then the Indian community wakes up and says, oh, we need to celebrate our rich history. But it shouldn't just be during this time, it should be every day, and it should be part and parcel of our own consciousness because it is our heritage that we need to take forward. What would you say to that?
No, absolutely. I think one of Dad's key issues was that we must never forget where we came from, in particular to the amazing sacrifices that were made by our forefathers. And so he was very strong on wanting to preserve that memory. And yes, I think it's absolutely key, especially in the times that we live in, that we never forget from the history that we've come from.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ashwin Bhai. We'd now like to go to a little video clip that actually looks at a bit of the history of the arrival of the 1860 indentured Indians. And we'll be back after that. Thank you so much. That particular piece was a dedication to the next guest speaker, and her name is Bunny Bulla. She's so well known in the KwaZulu-Natal Pietermaritzburg area for all the work that she's been involved with in the community. She's also been part of the Heritage Foundation for many, many years. And she has created a very innovative work environment, which is more to do with heritage tourism. And for her, as she says, and we will hear a little bit more about her in a few minutes, that this was something which was a passion to her, so that people are able to understand the history and take that history, take its values, and then move forward into a new environment, which I think is amazing. Baniji, you've been involved with the community work, you've done tourism initiatives for the very long time, and you've also been involved with the Gandhi Memorial Committee. Welcome to the show.
On the show.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Yes, namaste, namaste.
Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm privileged to be able to talk to you about the Pietermaritzburg Gandhi Memorial Committee and the work that has inspired and mentored a lot of people locally, nationally, and internationally. Our heritage is unique. Our claim to fame in Pietermaritzburg is that we really believe that we are the center of the world for democracy, and that was purely due to Gandhiji's stands at the railway station. We have a very vibrant group of people that are involved in the Gandhi Memorial Committee, and the work started many years ago. We commemorate many events like the 7th of June when Gandhiji was thrown out of the train. But our leadership and dedication by the community members like Dr. Mutala, Dasrat Bandhu. Dasrat Kaka has given so much to the heritage of Gandhiji and to Peter Maritzburg. Aru Naidu, our previous chairperson, K. Makkan and Himatlal Soni. These are stalwarts. They pioneers in the community that have applied all their energies and efforts to enable the railway station to be a heritage monument that is so easily recognized. It's become a pilgrimage site for many people, and we're so privileged to be able to work in this avenue. Oh, we are working a lot with youth, and that is very exciting because I think there's so much of despair during COVID. But with the youth, we instilling a sense of pride. We're trying to tell them, find the Gandhi in you. Gandhi was your age when he came to Peter Maritzburg. And, it's amazing because they all relate to the older Gandhi. But when we bring the young, arrogant Gandhi that came through to Peter Maritzburg and his journey of change, it actually makes the young people reflect differently. And we say to them, you have a Gandhi in you. We have been involved in the Gandhi Mandela Youth Summit, which has opened avenues for a lot of people, and we've had international youth coming in to be able to experience and learn from the legendary lessons of our leaders like Gandhi and Mandela.
Absolutely. And I think that's amazing that you've actually put a whole lot of the questions that I wanted to ask you in a nutshell, which I think is very nice because you've started off from the early years of Peter Maritzburg with some of the stalwart families, to where people are today. And one of the key things that we've seen is the influence in terms of education and the influence in terms of culture that the indentured Indians continued, to respond to and to ensure that it was instilled in young people. If you take Peter Maritzburg, if you take Hindu institutions like the Sanatan Dharma Sabha or the Arya Samaj movement or the South African Tamil federations, etc., they were stalwart members that ensured that the languages prevailed and that the values of the culture still continued. So, can you share a little bit about, for example, some of the temples and the institutions like Sisla and how that became important sites in terms of our social and political history in the country?
Well, I think one site really stands out is the Plesisla Arya Samaj Hall, which is the area where Mandela met with Dasrat Kaka to have the All in Africa conference. And that is just an amazing, amazing coincidence for bringing our heritage and the political stance through to the forefront. And to date, the plaque still reads the Plesisla Arya Samaj Hall. It was basically, on the 14th of May, on the 21st, 4th of March, it was Ram Nomi. What an auspicious day for Mandela to have come and had his meeting at the Arya Samaj Hall. I don't think so many, you can explain sometime how the universe does things. And Dasrat Kaka told Mandela that today is Ram Nomi and you are our Ram. And Mandela knew about that. So I think the Plesisla Arya Samaj Hall is the hall, the building, the organization that links us totally to South Africa and to Pietermaritzburg. The other areas of institutions are the Sri Vishnu Temple, the Mariamma Temple, and the Sufi Mosque. Now, that is located in an amazing uh, part of the city where within 100 meters, all three heritage prayers of worship that is over 100 years old, each one of them is located directly in there.
Hmm.
The community has, I think COVID has really hampered the community in their beliefs, but or in their religious practices. But the community leaders like Pandit Kiran Sadhguru has been in the forefront to be able to bring Havans to the fore, and the subscriptions are growing weekly. So we do have community leaders like the Dukran family, the Atwaru family, Satyapals, the Chedis, the Harkus, and the Bashuns, who were the previous stalwarts and leaders in the community. And Mr. Bashun, an old resident of Pietermaritzburg, was the first president of the Arya Samaj Hall. So the community leaders were very energetic people, I must say, to be able at that stage to challenge the apartheid government at the height of apartheid and have permission to erect the Gandhi statue in the city center. We house a temple in the Msunduzi Museum where every year Shivratri is celebrated in the museum. They have a full replica of a mandir in the museum. And this is all due to the energy, the passion, the dedication of the local community leaders.
Absolutely. And I think that's incredible that in spite of COVID-19, our community is still continuing to practice their faith. We spoke last week where we had the Pavli celebrations, which were celebrated throughout the country. And it was so wonderful to see everyone shine. Social media, pivoted so many different temples and institutions that celebrated this wonderful festival. However, there was still a lot of prejudice that prevailed. So, Baniji, I just wanted to ask you that in spite of the fact that we are here for 160 years, it seems that the rest of the community in the country don't understand the Hindus and don't understand a different cultural way of life. What are the gaps? And what do you think are the important things that we should do as a community? Yes, we can fight on social media, we can submit letters to the editors, etc., to say we need to celebrate our faith and without censure. But surely, as a community, we should come together to educate the rest of the country. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the gaps are glaring. We need to be able to embrace the young people. We need to influence the youth because they are the messengers of Hinduism to the next generation. We have to be able to communicate with them on their languages. And the hierarchy that sometimes prevails in the Hindu communities needs to be changed. There has to be a change of thinking. Unless we don't radically bring the youth in and start at a very infant stage in practicing and promoting our dress, our culture, our food, all aspects of our Hindu life, we are going to have to lose so much. When I compare what happens in other countries, people, our from the Indian community are so fluent in speaking their languages, whether it's Hindi, Gujarati, Telugu. Somehow in South Africa, it becomes such a great embarrassment to be able to say we can't communicate freely in our vernacular. So I think the emphasis has to be with the youth, and on the language. And of course, the young people have already been influenced by Bollywood. The dress code has changed. You're finding that they are ready to advance into Hinduism. It's for us, the older people, that we need now to be able to bring the glories of Hinduism through to the younger people, because their journeys are going to be the same. They will always have challenges, but they must be able to draw from our scriptures on how they meet their challenges and how they go forward.
Absolutely. And I think that's beautifully put. I think there needs to be a solid awareness in terms of practical Hinduism. And I think the most important aspect is to imbibe and to build the society and make them, and make information available more quickly than it used to be. But thank you so much for joining us in this part of the program. I'm now going to have a little video clip played, which talks about the history of the Indentured Indians. And then my next guest is going to be Pravesh Hardin, and he is the president of the World Hindu Foundation, who is possibly going to respond to some of the challenges you've just spoken about, where the youth now need to take the baton and move forward. And thank you very much for bringing about cultural tourism in the country. I think there needs to be a far more emphasis on that. So let's challenge the tourism industry in the country and say, take a leaf out of Banibola and let's make it accessible to everyone. Thank you so much. Let's go to the video clip, and after that, we'll come back to our guests in the studio.
Thank you.
We do apologize if there was an issue with sound. We are having a little bit of technical issues today, so we will play the video a little bit later. Up next is Pravesh Hardin. He's the chairperson of the World Hindu Foundation in South Africa, and he's here to share with us a little bit about the history of the Indentured Indians, as well as there's a special announcement that he's going to make. So welcome, Pravesh, to the show. Is Pravesh? Oh, is he not in? Okay. So sorry about that. I think there's also a technical problem on his side. We've got Ashwin in the studio as well as, and we have a new guest that we will go to in a few minutes. Ashwin, bhai, we spoke a lot about the Eastern Cape and how we have to preserve our stories, but not many people know some of the institutions that were built in that particular area in the country. Can you share with us a little bit about the temples as well as some of the institutions that came through with our ancestors?
Certainly, Yashvin. So I think it was towards the end of the 19th century, in the 1890s, that the Sri Subramanya Alyam organization was formed. It was quite an interesting story to that as well. And then in 1917, there was an organization called the Kshatriya Gujarati Mandal. And in the following year, 1918, the PE Yutnik Rajput Mandal was formed. Then in 1926, in Grahamstown, we had the Grahamstown British Indian Association formed. And in Yutnik in 1932, the Yutnik Hindu Mandal. The Tamil Catholic community also formed a body in 1934, and the PE Hindu Seva Samaj was formed in in the 1940s as well. These were just a few amongst a host of organizations that surely followed in their footsteps, and it ranged across sporting, cultural, social organizations.
Absolutely. So the cross section of the community contributed extensively. Do you find that the shape of the country, the actual shaping of South Africa, changed drastically with just the arrival of the indentured Indians? That it has given a new thought, let's put it that way, to how the ethos of South Africa is. And the fact that we can celebrate our unity in diversity is because of the indentured Indians that had settled here. And also, you've just mentioned they've contributed to sport, they've contributed to the economy, they've contributed to education, they've contributed to the political life of South Africa. So the very essence of Africa and the very essence of South Africa has come from the contribution of the Indian, the Hindu in this country. Do you think that this is so, and that it is a very significant contribution?
Absolutely. I think the contribution is valuable over the years. It certainly added to the kaleidoscope and the texture of the country, and it played a huge role in creating this rainbow nation of ours. Um, I think we also need to remember that we form part of the greater population, and especially for our younger generation, that while we are Hindus and Indians, that we also very much form part of a new democracy, a relatively young democracy, notwithstanding the challenges that we currently experience. Nevertheless, we play a very, very important role as a community, and a minority community at that. So I think undoubtedly the arrival and advent of Indians in South Africa has played a huge role in the shaping of a new South Africa, and I believe it continues to play that role as we move into the years ahead.
Absolutely. And there's a saying that dharma protects those who protect dharma. And it's important for the dharma of the Indian community to be solidified in this continent and in the country. Last week the president shared a message for Deepavali because he's aware of what a celebration like Deepavali means to the Hindu community. He did the same for Eid, and he did the same for Christmas and Easter, etc. What it shows is there's a unique celebration of dharma in South Africa. And if we do not hone into that in our institutions, in our textbooks, how many of our textbooks in this country can actually talk about the Ramnarayans or the Bandhus or the Chettiars or the Dayas in South Africa? Isn't that a massive gap in this country? So, what are your thoughts? How do you think we should influence the educational exchange programs in South Africa?
I think undoubtedly as the years go, that memory is starting to fade. That is a challenge we face as a people. And I think it's probably incumbent on us to make sure that the memory is preserved and honored, and the legacy never forgotten. How we do that, I think, is the big challenge, and how you get to young minds, because that's who you want to really target going forward. And while we have plenty of written books, etc., maybe we need to look at other media as well that's maybe more relevant to younger people, in addition to existing mediums. I think that is where the challenge lies. Um, Given where we are at the moment,
Absolutely.
country's history as well, I think it's a huge challenge, and it's one that is going to take a bit of doing, but nevertheless needs to be done.
Absolutely. And what you've done is you've touched on the nerve of who we are as a community. It needs to foster unity amongst the Hindu community. There must be, with immediate effect, centers of learning and institutions that need to be created. In fact, many years ago, I had the opportunity to interview His Holiness the Dalai Lama in South Africa. And he came to the site where Gandhi's previous home was burnt down. And he said, Gandhiji lived in this country for 21 years, and you do not have an institute to actually reflect his life. And within 2 weeks, the government of India sent money. South Africa came in, and you had the Gandhi and heritage committees being formed, which our sister Baniji spoke about earlier. It was through that incident that the country had to wake up in order to recognize who were some of the great people that actually lived in this space. And thank you, Ashwin, again for sharing this important part of our contribution in the country. I'd like to go to another little video clip. It is from the South African Broadcasting Corporation, which is shared on the digital platforms. And it showed that last week, the 1860 Heritage Committee did a symbolic ceremony at the beach in KwaZulu-Natal to remember the history of the Indian or the arrival of the Indians in this country. So let's take a peek before we come back to our studio, where we have a very important guest, Bheju Babu, that will join us. We do apologize. Unfortunately, there's a technical difficulty today for some reason, and we absolutely apologize. We will definitely play those little video clips on the show, a little later. But I'd like to go now to Babu Bheju, as a political activist. He's a former deputy mayor of Pietermaritzburg municipality, and his father built the Bheju and Maharaj schools in Pietermaritzburg. He's also the former president of the South African Business Chamber, and he's an active leader, stalwart, and known to do lots of seva work in the community. Welcome to the program, Babu Beju Sahab.
Namaste. Namaskar. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Namaste. Thank you. Thank you. I know we've had a very off-on relationship during the day today, but I'm glad to be back home. And thank you for having me on your show, and thank you, and may I wish you well to your listeners.
Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us. I know you're a very, very busy individual. Today, Babu Bejo has been on solar farm sites, and he's had to work through the rain, which I think is also an issue now in the country, in especially in KZN. Um, I wanted to find out that you've been part of the Heritage Committee. When was the Heritage Committee set up, and why were they set up? What were some of the important goals that the Heritage Committee had to look to during its tenure?
No, thanks, Yashi. Look, before 2010, I mean, uh, our arrival in 1860, some of the milestones were basically 50 years, 100 years, and perhaps 150 years. But the 50 years and 100 years took place under the old regime, and not much emphasis. I know for a fact that in Pietermaritzburg, I was very young in 1960. I was probably only 12 years old. But I know for a fact that they celebrated the arrival of our forefathers by hosting Krishna Shah and a couple other artists from India. And I remember Mamam and Chota Matara and many others, T.R. Mudley and many others that were involved in this. But I think the actual celebration, the 150th year celebration, was perhaps the first significant moment under the new democracy. And it was realized that, look, we need to add more effort. But where the 1860 Heritage Center stands in Derby Street at the moment, that used to be called the Documentation Center, where perhaps the history of our forefathers and many other things were recorded and kept. And for some reason, that was about to be dismantled, and we would have lost all our documents. But the people that were involved got together and said, look, we cannot do this, and we need to create a heritage center commemorating the arrival of Indians in the country. And around that time, the 1860 Heritage Center was found. But all the documents then went to and was placed at UDW. There's a Gandhi Lutuli desk that is there. And if you want to find anything about our forefathers, go there and you will find it. But the Heritage Center was set up with the board of directors. Dr. Krish Gokul is the chair, and there are many other eminent people like Bramdo and Suren Naidu. I mean, what you call Salvan Naidu is the curator. He's done a marvelous job. I don't know if any of you have been there as yet. It's in Derby Street, sort of just opposite the race course, and we need to visit that place. It's a beautiful place of history, but so is the UDW Gandhi Lutuli desk. But so is the Msunduzi Museum or the KZN Museum in Maritzburg, and the Gandhi and the railway station. Most of these actually have so much of information for our people. It's unbelievable. But coming back to the question you actually asked, in 2010 there was a resolution taken that a monument would be put up commemorating the arrival of our forefathers. And they set up a little committee. The committee was basically based in Durban, and and for some reason that monument never was never implemented. I don't want to go into the details, and a lot of it can be researched. But around a year ago, early in January this year, the premier said, "Look, we're going to have to revive this," and he asked MEC Ravi Pillai to set up a committee to see where we could go. So we had an initial meeting in Mount Edgecombe. and a lot of us turned up, and a small committee was formed. But then COVID came, and nothing happened until about perhaps 6 weeks ago, and then we began to meet per Zoom. So the committee that we have right now is an extension of the committee that was actually formed in 2010 when we celebrated the 150 years. So this committee got together and said, look, what can we do to commemorate 160 years? You probably notice I use the word commemorate rather than celebrate. It's more about commemoration. And obviously a lot of discussion took place. The issue of the monument, that that committee continues doing its work, and the premier has now confirmed that by February we'll definitely have some sort of public participation as to say how it should be done. So we're not far away from getting to that particular point. But then, because we couldn't have many big bang events to actually commemorate this day, a lot of small ones took place, like in Montagecombe, in Chatsworth. The magazine barracks people held one. The Mariamma Temple in and the 1860 Foundation in Montagecombe had one. We also had one in Marisburg, by the way, hosted by the Midlands Hindu Society in partnership with the Sindhuzi Museum. So really, it was more of a commemoration. But I serve on that committee, but it's an interim committee, and maybe in February new people will come on it. But we also formed a youth committee with roughly about maybe 10 to 15 youth that showed a huge amount of interest. We're hoping for that to bring them to Pietermaritzburg as well, so that we can work through the Midlands Hindu Society and the Gandhi Memorial Committee to encourage more youth to participate. You mentioned earlier on the issue of not understanding each other's cultures. I really would like us, and I don't want an answer, by the way. Do we understand the Zulu culture? I guess no. So I think it'll be also, truthful to say that they probably don't understand ours. There's a gap somewhere. We've been brought up in a divided society, and we have a lot of work to do. I mean, we're 1.5 billion people in the country, and by the way, we're not all Hindus. I like to point out one thing. When the first 5-year term ended with the indentured laborers and the people that chose to stay, they were given the chance to go back to India, by the way, and chose not to. And the day they chose to stay, they gave up the Indian nationality and they chose the South African nationality. Otherwise, they'd go back to India, but they chose to stay. But the one thing they succeeded in doing, they succeeded in buying property. I don't know how they did it. And they always had a communal family property where all the kakas, the kakis, the mosis, the akkas, the ayas, and everybody lived. And the saying goes that if you open one window in an Indian home, you would see a vegetable garden. And if you open another window, you'd see a school. And if you open the third window, you'd see a place of worship, whether it be a mosque, whether it be a temple, or whether it be a church. But there was always a place of worship. So the four things that for me is the grounding of our heritage is a place to live in, your own home, a place to worship, food security, and education. Now, I would want to believe that that is where it is. So I'm a Hindu, by the way. I'm not too much of a temple person, but I light my lamp every morning and every night. I believe that I have this fantastic relationship with God. We talk to each other daily, twice a day. But I haven't been to a mass. I haven't been. Just to tell you, my father founded the Resa Pari Samaj in 1935. He was the first president. He was the founding president of the Resa Pari Samaj. The honors board, the Aryan Hall, is a legacy of that particular history. And the Resa Pari Samaj, we grew up in that particular Samaj. But I left the country in 1967, so I had a spell that was out for about 10 to 12 years. So coming back 10 to 12 years later, you saw many, many changes. But be that as it may, I mean, they then built the school in 1945, and that is the history. But you know what amazes me most? I'm trying to find my surname. Beju is not my surname.
Now, Babu Bhai, I'm gonna interrupt because of the time
Please do.
factor. Because I want to ask you one or two
Please do.
questions, and I think
Please do. Please do. Please do.
and you're absolutely animated and wonderful and interesting, and I think we could listen to you all night. You know, you've just mentioned that the Indians who had come here, contributed towards education, food security, culture, religion, etc., and that became part of the pillars in which they were able to survive. And those pillars continued today, and that's the continuation we would want, to benefit the next generation. But I think a memory of a community is vitally important to what? To the psyche, to the character, to the growth of a nation. Would you say it's true? And why?
No,
Why
of course.
is the memory important?
Look, I think the memory is important. I think basically these are our founding principles. These are our roots, and all these memories are important. But we got to be very very careful to say, how do we integrate these memories? I grew up on the back of my
Yes,
cocoa because my mother worked with my father. So I grew up on the back of my cocoa, and she was an African cocoa. But my point is, how do we integrate? How do we say? How do we benefit it from each other's cultures? How do we benefit it from each other's goodwill? So I think these are the roots of our foundations, and without doubt, without that, we wouldn't have any morality or ethics or anything of that type.
absolutely. I think the eternal values of Sanatan Dharma is the one that gave the Hindus in the diaspora the energy and the ammunition in order to live and to fight against injustices wherever they were, and to also be proud of their rich heritage. The sad part is that we've had the British occupation and then we had apartheid. So it was a kind of double whammy in a situation where it continually it tried to erode the psyche and the identity of the Hindu and the Indian at large. Don't you think we, who are living in this fragmented society, should be the ones to start building the puzzle and bridging the gaps? And fundamentally for me, whilst the Indian were able to utilize the economy to build themselves, etc., we still haven't plowed back significantly. You spoke about cultural integration. Yes, that's one of the key things we haven't done successfully, and perhaps we need to open those spaces. Because if you take the indigenous African culture and you take Hinduism, the parallels are fundamentally, so strong that they could be the same. And we need to examine that and bring those ideas to the fore. How do you feel about creating, integrated schools of learning, human values schools of learning, so that we can learn from each other in an environment that isn't biased to one culture or another?
My own view is that because we come from such a divided past, and because we carry this particular baggage of separatism, I don't think you're going to be able to force this or work. I think it's going to evolve. My own view, I think it is evolve. I think my granddaughter is in metric, and she's in Carter High. But when I go to pick her up there, the interaction that you see between the different groupings or between the different sexual group, I'm not going to call it race anymore, because I think race is a little tick that you put in a box. And I want to believe that, look, it's people of different cultural backgrounds. I say many cultures, one nation. So but you begin to see the cultures integrate. The sleep-ins at home are totally different to the sleep-ins 20 years ago. My children grew up in Northdale, but the people that came to sleep basically were from that particular area. But now, 20 years later, when I have my granddaughter that's in an integrated school, the sleepovers is like totally rainbow. But it's amazing. So it's something else that maybe my family is a bit weird. My one son-in-law is English, the other son-in-law is Afrikaner, and we have an adopted Zulu boy who studied in India and got his master's degree in India. So we are totally we are multicolored family living under one roof, basically. It didn't happen by choice.
Vasudeva
It
Kutumbakam.
actually, yes, it evolved. It actually evolved. We had to deal with it as it evolved. Now, that is what we need to do. We need to respond. We don't need to react. The danger is when you begin to react, you become subjective or emotional. You need to actually respond. When my daughter, when she got to varsity and decided to move into a commune with this long-haired, Afrikaner guy, we got a bit of a shock. But then my wife and I sat down and said, okay, let her go for it. When she's fed up, she'll come back home. She married the guy 12 years later and had 2 children. She's a chemical engineer. He's a mechanic. But my point is that if you allow things to evolve within what I call humanity, not necessarily religion, but spirituality and humanity. That is what it is all about. It is about spirituality and humanity. I will not give up my Hinduism, but I will not at the same time separate it from any other forms of spirituality.
And I think that's the beauty of Sanatan Dharma. It's inclusive. It brings everyone into one space. And I think that type of learning, the Vedantic teachings that we have, should be spread across.
It's a way of life.
But thank you very much.
It's not really a religion.
It is
It's a way of life, actually. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me on. I hope, and I love listening. I love listening to your other speakers. It was it was very educational. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone who has joined us today. Ashwin Bhai, Sister Baniji, and Babuji today. There is one little announcement that in terms of the history of our indentured Indians who came into the country, their contribution has been phenomenal, particularly in the economic field as well as in the political space. And today we also honor the memory of our great sister and comrade Priscilla Jana, where on Saturday there's going to be a commemoration, which is a global commemoration between India and South Africa, as well as different parts of the globe at 3 o'clock on Zoom. So you'll find the links that will come up on the show at the end of the show. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me today on a very robust discussion on the and commemorating the arrival of the Indentured Indians to South Africa. We can speak much more, but we will do so in the following weeks. Thank you again. Namaste.